Something I've wanted to discuss for a while is how good are adventures, not only in terms of what they bring to the table, but for the health of the game too. Before you hear my opinion, please let me know down below if you like adventures or not. Great, let's go. In the history of Sea of Thieves' life cycle, as of making this video, there have been two main ways of progressing the story in a significant way. We did have the campaigns like the Hungering Deep and Cursed Sails, or even Haunted Shores and Ashen Winds, but these were more gameplay focused and offered small amounts of progression. The two main groups would be Tall Tales and Adventures. Essentially they're both the same thing, they deliver story content, they're split into episodes, and they've been released slowly over the course of the game's life cycle. The two key differences are the disparity between the scale, complexity, and impact, with the other being whether they're permanent or not. Tall Tales, when they used to be added to the game, stay forever, whereas Adventures exist for 2 or 3 weeks. I would go as far as saying that Tall Tales went through 3 iterations before they were canned and eventually replaced for Adventures. So let's talk about the benefits and limitations of Tall Tales first. Full disclosure, I do prefer Tall Tales at this point, but that's not to say Adventures aren't going to become better as Rare figure out what they want out of them. The first set of Tall Tales were released as part of the Anniversary update in April 2019. Anniversary was such a colossus in part due to the 9 Tall Tales that dropped as a bumper pack. It was the full campaign, you could play it at your own pace, and everyone who joined after that point could also do the same. I think the beauty of the Shores of Gold Tall Tales was just the volume of the content, and they had the benefit of being the first proper story quests. I think that having all 9 episodes all at once really made you appreciate the journey you were on. The pacing was really good and felt like a grand tour of all the lore in the Sea of Thieves, enhanced by a complimentary book too. The puzzles in the first set of Tall Tales were definitely the best and most complex. They were genuine riddles with minimal clues and required some thinking to solve them, or even some map knowledge. I think they can border on tedious at times though, but overall they were the right level of difficulty. Shores of Gold did feel like the quintessential pirate quest. You had riddles left behind by those who tried before, failed adventurers, and even a MacGuffin left behind by an ancient civilization. Rare absolutely nailed every aspect of this. The magic can be experienced anytime and by any new player that joins, and to this day it remains a window into Rare's old story approach, for better or worse. But I couldn't fathom this massive piece of content being vaulted like a lot of the year 1 and 2 stuff. That's not to say they were perfect. Some of the missions were bloated by far too much sailing, namely Stars of the Thief, Art of the Trickster, and the Wild Rose, something that can be exacerbated by bad RNG too. I suppose one could argue that this can add to the feeling of the voyage being substantial. I will say too that the Shores of Gold is much better if you've read the novel first. Otherwise, some of the lore and reveals might be wasted, so its true potential is hampered if you don't like reading. For those not invested in the game, it did have a big time commitment, as each tale could take you an hour or 2, or even 3 to complete. They didn't have checkpoints at launch either, so if you lost your quest item, good luck beginning again from the start. This then moves me on to my next point. The Shores of Gold is stagnant now when it comes to its importance to the story, and this isn't even the fault of the adventures. So many characters involved have moved on, so when you do play these, you're literally viewing the past in a live environment. It's a strange concept. The Gold Hoarder doesn't look like that anymore, Briggsy is long dead, Greymarrow has been revived twice, and the crew of the Morning Star were freed years ago. I suppose you can look at this like replaying a campaign mission in Halo or Call of Duty or anything like that, but I do feel that Sea of Thieves has this evolving world that conflicts with it. Of course, you also have the issue of the content being dead and lacking longevity. Yes, I can play these missions anytime and enjoyed coming back to them, but for most players, this is one and done content, or at least until they've gotten their gold curse. New players aren't installing Sea of Thieves to play 3-year-old story quests, but they may log on after seeing someone complete a C4 or fight over a new world event. Don't forget, this was dropped with a new faction, new mechanics and sandbox changes, and a brand new PvP mode. It wasn't just the Shores of Gold for 4 months. You'll see this issue again very shortly. After the success of Shores of Gold, Rare were keen to recapture that magic with their next story arc, Flameheart's arc. This was another villain teased in the book, and it was time for him to leap off the pages onto the screen. The difference this time is that Rare had changed the update cadence to monthly updates in July 2019. Flameheart's Tall Tale arc just consisted of 2 due to Rare's change of plans, but both of them refined what made the Tall Tales so good. Seabound Soul was more of a mystery, a slow burn in which a big reveal made you shit yourself. The sailing was certainly reduced and the puzzles were more accessible. For what it's worth, trudging back through the memories using the ferryman's lantern was familiar territory, with the atmosphere dialed up to 11. The accommodations were also reduced to make them less grindy, requiring only 3 completions instead of 5. I think spacing these tall tales out was experimental. It allowed for the story to unfold every couple months instead of it being finished in 1 week. Seabound Soul came out in November 2019 and Heart of Fire released in March 2020. A new tall tale every 4 months is quite good, it would be a decent pace, and given how much happened in each of the tall tales, it felt significant. Heart of Fire was really the same, it's a big tall tale with just the right length, basically a shorter version of Shores of Gold. I don't think these suffered with the same stagnation, as both of them released with big features like chain shots, blunderbombs, fire, and a pirate legend voyage. Not to mention, new content was coming out every single month. It's possibly the best tall tale of all time, but after its release, the tall tales just stopped, and we never really knew why. Until the year after this came out. Then Rolls Around a Pirate's Life announced at E3 2021 to everyone's shock. This was a return to the Shores of Gold method of delivery, where the tall tales were all dropped on day 1 instead of over the course of several months. Again, this was done due to another change in the update cadence, with seasons. Seasons were originally coming out every 3 months, and A Pirate's Life was the key content in Season 3. A Pirate's Life marked another soft reboot to Tall Tales, partially because it focused on how the Pirates of the Caribbean characters affected the world of Sea of Thieves, but they took a very linear approach with these ones. These story episodes felt like a fairground ride, where, for the most part, we were strung along on beautiful on-rail sections. Something else most of the tall tales did is that they took place in brand new areas. We had Sailor's Grave and Dead Man's Grotto, the Siren Citadel, the Whispering Bayou, the Fort of Lost Souls, Isla Tozero, the Coral Fortress, and lastly, the Coral Spire. The only real occurrences of this happening before were in the Heart of Fire and Shores of Gold, so it felt fresh indeed. However, these tall tales suffered from the exact same issues as Shores of Gold. The Sea of Thieves characters have long moved on from these events, like the Dark Brethren, Rose and George, Pendragon, and Eli Slate. I think what was worse is that the 5 tall tales were essentially the content for nearly 4 months, with no reason to replay them once you've earned all the commendations. It did feature the new enemies introduced in them as random encounters, but that was the extent of the extra content. Of course, we did get the seasonal bells and whistles, but that was it. I think Rare recognised the massive story potential this game had, and they certainly came up with some changes to alleviate the issues with dropping tall tales. Finally, at the start of 2022, we had the announcement of Adventures. These were smaller story missions that were time limited. They aimed to bring them out every month as a complement to seasonal drops, almost as a way of separating the 2 kinds of content. This also suggests that the tall tales were dead and buried, with a new brand fitting the idea of a live service game that much better. On top of this, it also encouraged people to download Sea of Thieves through Game Pass. Take note that Adventures are never intended to match the scope and complexity of Tall Tales, but does that mean we can't compare them? Of course not. Adventures have the main benefit of progressing the story at a much faster pace. Instead of getting the story maybe once a year, we get it every month, or we're supposed to anyway. Granted, this works really well for veteran players and channels like myself, it's content I actively look forward to. And yeah, so far the story has been really good, at least in my opinion. To further this, Adventures have evolved the map at a higher cadence than what we had before. Golden Sands was shrouded and unshrouded all through player choice. This was the case with Shrouded Islands 2, where Shipwreck Bay, Crescent Isle, Marauder's Arch and Devil's Ridge became shrouded and unshrouded in the space of a month. We've had some smaller changes too, like Wanda's workshop being ransacked, the Killer Whale 2 being beached and then removed, or even the Phantom Jailer appearing in the forts. Come to think of it, it's not like we haven't had this before. We did have the Reaper's hideout constructed over the course of a few months, same with the Sea Dog Tavern, same with the Castaways Camp and the Sovereign Tent. The map can still evolve, but I suppose not in the way the Adventures could provide. Look at the additions with the Tall Tales, they're not being used outside of those functions. Along with these benefits, having a new adventure each month means if you don't like that month's content, you can always wait for next month. For instance, I'm not a fan of the story arc that's just concluded, as it felt like a tangent, whereas next month we're back on track. Finally, the main draw of the adventure is definitely the community decisions. With Lost Sands being a triumph in terms of community engagement and investment, we certainly could not have that outside of the adventure structure. I definitely think Lost Sands was a success in that department, and we have another one to look forward to later this year, and I think that's going to be Adventure 10. Just like Tall Tales though, adventures do have downsides, and there are quite a few. The first is obvious, the gameplay and variety of the quests. I know this has been a big sticking point for lots of people, but the quality doesn't hold a candle to Tall Tales. That's just a fact. Shrouded Islands was sailed to Shipwreck Bay, fight phantoms and sail back to Bell. Forts of the Forgotten was sail to Golden Sands, then to any of the forts, fight some phantoms, and then go back to Bell. Shrouded Deep was the Hungering Deep on steroids and honestly was top notch, even if it did require co-op and lots of sailing. But the actual climax was amazing, the fight, the music, and the reveals were just stunning. Lost Sands was a fetch quest again, but the content was outside of the game, funnily enough. So I can sort of give this one a pass. Forsaken Hunter was sail from A to B to C to D, back to A and then to E, with some use of the Ferryman's Lantern and some more fights of phantoms. Lastly, A Hunter's Cry was the different experience with using the portals and could have been amazing if it was a single crew experience with just maybe a bit more to do. It would have been really good as it is now, just without other crews ruining it. You can say Sea of Thieves is a giant fetch quest, and that is true, or even the case with the Tall Tales. It's just adventures lack the set pieces, the puzzles, and the mystery behind those designs. Quite simply, they lack complexity. It's paradoxical, as why would you put in the Shores of Gold level quality for content that's null after 2 weeks and vaulted forever? By the very nature of adventures existing, they can't be anything better than the sum of their parts. I really thought these would ramp up in quality and scale as the team got into the flow of things. It will likely be a basic fetch quest with combat for adventures 1 and 2 of an arc, with 3 being a co-op one with a new gameplay experience. Obviously, maybe twice a year we'll get a decision as a community, which will break things up. The final issue with Adventures is the effect it takes on the rest of the content, the seasonal drops. In 2021, we had 5 seasons of content, with 10 to 14 week gaps between the seasons. In 2022, we've had 2 seasons so far, with 3 total as of November later this year. Season 7 was delayed twice to ensure it launched in the best quality it could, but that looks to be to the detriment of Season 8 and 9. Season 8 would have been releasing in 4 weeks if not for that delay, but instead we have to wait another 13 or so. I certainly think that Adventures play a role in this, with manpower being diverted away from seasons to something that attracts Game Pass players. And to be honest with you, it's a little frustrating, as the seasonal content is what we'll be engaging with in years to come, and not an hour voyage that gets deleted after 2 weeks. Mike hinted there was a slight change to the content cadence in both the new podcast and after the launch of Season 7, so it remains to be seen how the adventures and the season balance changes next year. So after all of this, I put it to you guys, are adventures right for Sea of Thieves? Or is there a better way of striking a balance to please everyone? I don't think the future of the game lies in adventures, despite the next 18 months being planned out, but systems like captaincy, like world events, and excellent content like Legend of the Veil will be the future of the game. I really hope that Rare finds the sweet spot to make sure Sea of Thieves thrives in years to come.